I'm a conservator working at the Anchorage Museum here in Alaska, and I'm not a mount maker, but I have been fortunate to be involved in the mannequin making process at various places I've worked, including with Shelley at the National Museum of American Indian. This experience has greatly shaped my approach to mannequins for the safe display of clothing. I wanted to share an example from the opposite point of view, with the deinstallation of an entire gallery and the deconstruction of 30-year-old plaster mannequins based on real people, and the new approach we now use to support clothing realistically but safely. In 2016, the Collections Department started the challenge of deinstalling the old Alaska Gallery, at that time the largest exhibition space in the museum. As a textile conservator, I was relieved as the old dioramas and cases were not sealed, so after 30 years on display, a significant level of dust had built up on the clothing. Also, the old mannequins were very heavy, rigid, and the joints were inflexible. They were not formed to the clothing, often causing stress to the skins or textile fibers. Area around shoulders, bent knees, and buttocks were subsequently deformed and misshaped. The old mannequins were not constructed from archival materials, being moulded from plaster with metal connectors. There was no protective barrier between the mannequins and clothing, with pressure-sensitive tape and plaster being in direct contact. Often the surface of the mannequins was crumbling and powdery, leaving abrasive particles of plaster inside and on the clothing. The parka hoods in particular were often tightly fitted around the mannequin heads and necklines, causing stress to the skins of the fur clothing. The fur was crushed, hair broken from the parkas being positioned under the legs of heavy-weighted mannequin, and in some cases the clothing was hanging unsupported and without appropriate padding. The shape of the mannequins often being too large and too exaggerated stretched the fabrics in these areas and permanently deformed the clothing, especially where the mannequin backs were curved and the knees were bent. During deinstallation, there were many occasions where it was incredibly difficult to remove the clothing from the mannequin due to the articulated mannequin positions with bent legs, arms, and feet. We had to assess the best method to remove the torsos and heads from inside the parkas, while trying to mitigate excessive handling often required in this particular circumstance. The old mannequins did not permit safe dressing and undressing of the clothing. Each item of clothing was different, so we had to evaluate each step of a removal on a case-by-case basis. It soon became clear that the mannequins were not constructed exactly the same. Sometimes we were unable to remove the steel connection pins in the arms, so it was necessary to carefully cut through the aluminum joints to remove hands and forearms. This all had to be undertaken under not ideal circumstances, with the mannequin still dressed with the clothing, causing unnecessary and avoidable stress to the skins and textiles, and to the conservators who had to do the work. We also had to be sensitive during this whole process, as the mannequins had been shaped based on real people within the Alaska community. So we did not reuse the old mannequins, but instead the new mannequins are now made from archival materials. Not one is the same shape or size. The new mannequins have been individually padded, but not over padded, which would cause damage to the clothing, putting stress on the seams and stretching the skins. Some of the mannequins feature shoulder wings, which is a clever way to add more padding to the shoulder area, but still allow easy access to connect or remove the mannequin arms. The new mannequins were modified for each item of clothing. Areas of weakness such as the shoulders, upper arms, neckline, parka hoods are now fully supported, reducing stress on the seams and creases in the skins. The mannequins now allow for safe dressing and undressing of the clothing. The final display gives the illusion that the clothing is being worn on the body without looking too human-like or overly bulked out. These beautiful parkas and tunic can be seen in the new Alaska exhibit. Having been part of several programs throughout the museum, we understand the need for Alaskan artists and makers to easily see the construction and embellishment details in order to continue these traditions. And so this, as well as supporting the clothing, is a main focus of our approach to mannequins at the Anchorage Museum.